Page 237 of The Unfolding is the story of Russ Taff.
Guilt is something that you did wrong. Shame tells you you are the thing that's wrong. And that was instilled in me at a very, very early age. My dad, who never encouraged me, and daily in that house, is you're not worth a bullet shoot you with, not worth the salt that goes on your bread. You will never amount to anything.
God's story has been unfolding.
Since the beginning of time.
He invites you to be a part of it.
Wow. Another page in The Unfolding.
Hey, this is Meredith Foster. Russ Taff says shame is a prison. For more than 40 years, he was locked in the prison of shame, hiding from pain, isolating himself from others, trapped in a secret addiction. To the world, he was one of the most successful Christian music artists of all time. His career includes 6 Grammys, 18 Dove Awards. He's been inducted into the Gospel Music Association Hall of Fame an unprecedented 3 times, once as a soloist, once as a member of the Imperials, and once as a member of the Gaither Vocal Band. Honors, awards, accolades a mile long. But it all felt empty. Nothing could fill the void. Nothing could stop the voices of self-hatred. The only thing that could quiet those voices, even for a moment, was alcohol. Russ was singing songs for Jesus, but he was living a secret life as an alcoholic. Not long ago, I had the privilege of traveling to Bell Buckle, Tennessee, population around 400. That's where Russ and his wife, Tori, live in a beautiful Victorian home. We sat around Russ's dining table, and we talked for hours. We talked about the power of shame and the struggle to be free of it. We talked about the power of love and the supernatural healing that comes from it. The story of Russ's abusive childhood, it's a hard one. But more than anything, this is a story of hope.
My father was a very charismatic Pentecostal preacher, very charismatic. And my mother and her sisters were the greatest influence in my childhood. I mean, just stunning singers, Mama and her sisters. So, but our world was built around church, and it was a cultish kind of Pentecostalism. It was in the country, no newspapers, no magazines, no radio, and nothing. And we were in church 4 nights a week, and then Sunday morning, weren't really allowed to, the older brothers anyway, to play sports because that's partaking in the world. And we were basically just waiting for Jesus to come back. Your world was the church. So growing up, you were just in church constantly. I didn't have a lot of friends. I had my cousin because we went to the same church, but I never invited any of my friends because it was wild. I mean, just absolutely wild. But they were sincere. You know, my parents didn't set out to ruin me and my brother's lives. They didn't. And Mom and Dad both, they loved Jesus. They just really loved Jesus. And when Dad was sober and in there, I'd never seen anybody work as hard for people as he did. He worked 6 days a week repairing farm machinery, and Mom worked in the fields out in the San Joaquin Valley at Sunkist, packing fruit, and chopping cotton, just whatever work. And she worked. And they needed both their income, and we were still below the poverty line. I mean, wow. We were just poor.
And he was also preaching, pastoring?
Yeah, but we're talking 20 people.
Okay.
It's not like, and there's no money. And in fact, I remember, I started this. His offerings on Sunday night, they'd take him an offering, and it was like $12.35, $9.10, and Mom had this rhythm that every Sunday night, me and my little brother would go home, and she would count it. And, we're talking $6. I mean, these are poor people. Wow. Some of them worked in the fields and stuff, but Mom, she would count it, and it was so peasly, but she would look up and she goes, "That's why they call them Pentecostals." It was music. And my mother sang, my cousin sang. It was, and because it was such a small church, if you wanted to, there was always time. So Mom said that I sang my first solo when I was 4, and it was just one of the hymns from the church, but I really wanted to sing. And so she just stood me up in the altar, and I sang a hymn, a chorus of a song. So music was the part. I didn't understand Dad's sermons a lot. It was always, we got to do better, we got to do better, we got to do better, but he never told us how.
Oh, wow.
It was like, you got to do better, we got to do better. My dad was an alcoholic before he became a Christian, and God called him to preach. And so he and a couple of buddies of his, they bought an old washateria, a small little old washateria, and they pulled the old washing machines out and dryers, and they painted it, fixed it up, and put some pews in there, and we started the church.
Wow.
East Side Tabernacle. And my aunt played piano, and my cousin played bass. We didn't have drums for a long, long time. But Dad relapsed when I was 7, and I didn't know what drunk was. I had no idea. I'd never been around it, never seen anybody drunk. And it was Saturday night, and we did church Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday night, Sunday morning, and Sunday night.
Wow.
So he didn't show up. He was late. And so we lived a half a block. So Mom sent me home to tell Daddy church has started, to hurry up and get down there because he was going to preach. And we were already in the beginnings of the service. So I run home, and I go into the house, and it was a little shotgun house. And I run through the house. It's not that big at all, but I yelled out his name, and I heard singing in the back bedroom, and it was weird. It was just strange, and it was kind of slurred, and I didn't know what that was, but it scared me. It really, really scared me, and I hadn't even got to his room yet, but just that sound was so foreign. And so I turn around the corner, and I see him. He's laying in that bed, and he's just singing, and really out of it, and didn't respond when I called his name. So I run back down to the church, and I said, Mom, something's wrong. Something's wrong with Dad. I don't know. And so she, with me, we go back to the house, and she walks into their bedroom in the back, and she bursts into tears, and she just starts saying, oh, Joe, oh, Joe, oh, Joe. He had been sober almost 10 years, but he just fell off the wagon. And I knew something horrible had happened just looking at Mama's reaction. And that's when everything changed. Everything changed as far as people and the way they treated us. And
did he stop preaching? Did he withdraw from the church? Oh, yeah. Okay. Wow.
He stopped preaching. Nobody talks to you. My cousin stopped talking.
Oh, really?
Aunts and uncles. Half the church was relatives, and they just stopped. And Mama was just abandoned pretty much by all of them. But Dad, he had this pattern because nobody wanted to pastor this. It was 20 people. But he loved to preach, and he loved to pastor. So it'd be like 4 or 5 months. He'd get straight, clean, and that sort of thing. And they would vote him back in, and he would start again and start preaching again and visiting the sick and going to the old folks' homes. And he could, out where we lived in California, the San Joaquin Valley there was no running. It was all pumps. Everybody had pumps in this little bitty community. And so Dad would work all day, not on church night, and he would go to people's homes and fix their pumps. And I mean, he would bring home rabbits that they would give him because there was no money.
That's the way he paid.
I'm serious.
Mm-hmm.
I'm serious.
I believe it. I believe it.
And so he would get back in and doing well. We're back in the groove. Everybody talking to us again. And you kind of start forgetting how bad it was because things are going so good.
And nobody wants to remember how bad it was.
Nobody wants to talk about it. Mm-hmm. Nobody. They just act like it didn't happen. But then maybe first, it'd be like a year later, and he'd do it again. And the same pattern, they would vote him out or whatever. Not vote him out. He would they didn't want him there. And then he would go 4 or 5 months and get clean, get straight. And the church, okay, come back. And that continued. just continued. But my safe place, the place where I found strength and courage and peace, was music, just music. And Mom had we had one of those big, things that had a record player in it, and the big old console thing. But then she got, she would save her money, working in the field. She'd save enough money to buy 2 LPs at the end of the month. And so that was her thing when she got her check and that sort of thing. And they needed every penny to run the household. I had 4 brothers, so there were 5 boys in that house. She would go and buy LPs, and she loved Mahalia. She just loved Mahalia Jackson and Vestal Goodman. I grew up with Black, White, Black, White, Black, White, and she had a great collection of Clara Ward and Blind Willie Johnson, Tear This Building Down. That Mama had that record, and that's when I first heard that song. But that was kind of our life, and but every time it happened, your world just falls apart, and you always think, maybe this time, but he would always. And I'll jump ahead to where I guess I was 9, and the worst whipping I ever got in my life was, you can't talk outside the family. The gospel that he preached, the pastor was supposed to really be up here, and everybody else was down here, and so you had to. So what meant was, you can't tell anybody what's going on in the house. I had a little friend when I was 9 in the church, and my older brother had a friend his age, in that family. So we spent the night together, and them in one bedroom. But he heard me tell my little friend that Mom and Dad had an argument. And so he goes home before me, and he tells Mom that I had told him that they had an argument. So she was waiting for me when I got home. And when I came in the house, she just started screaming at me. I mean, there was no filter when she got to that point. And came over, and I'm sitting in a chair and with my head down, and she came over and started punching me in the face and screaming, "You don't tell anybody what goes on in this home. You don't talk to anybody what goes on in this home." And she kept screaming that I fell out of the chair and balled up, and she's kicking me and kicking me and kicking me, screaming, "You don't tell anybody what goes on in this family." I mean, I had to wear long sleeve shirts to school for a while because of the bruises on my arm. But back then, they didn't know to even look for that kind of stuff. So that taught me you never talk to anybody what goes on in this house. But at 7 on, you have to lie. And I was taught how to lie. And so you have this strong preacher preaching Jesus. And I love Jesus. I always have. I loved him. But then when Dad would relapse, you would have to say, "Yeah, everything's fine. He's got the flu," and that. And in your heart, this is wrong. But you had to protect him, and you sacrificed yourself to protect him. And that just tore at my soul, because here they are preaching a certain gospel. They're not living up to it. So that, but I would listen to music. I would, they got the turntable and they got the speakers you could move around. And I guess it started when I was like 9, when things were bad. And I would lay on the floor after school, and Mom's working, Dad's working, and my brothers are, and I would turn those speakers to each ear, and I would listen. I would just listen to everything Mom had, and it quieted me. It brought peace, and I would cry. Just certain songs that, I don't know, that would, it would take me away to a place that was where he was. And so I did it every day. Chaos is in the home, and when addiction's in the home, it's chaos. And you can stay out to 5 a.m. and nobody cares. It's like, they don't care if you do your homework. They don't care, because Mom was just so immersed in Dad and his problem that we were just kind of an afterthought. And that's when I kind of took over. When I was 12, I took over my little brother, who was 10. We were 16 months apart, to make sure that he got his homework done.
You were parenting him.
Mm-hmm. And making sure we had breakfast before we go eat, before we go to school, and make sure we made it to the bus, after school. And so he became my responsibility. So Mama taught me how to play guitar when I was 11. And my hands were just getting big enough that I could reach around to make a chord. And I would practice and I would practice, again, music. It would just take me to this place of serenity and peace and God. My deal was I couldn't play sports. We weren't allowed to anyway, but I was even, pick up games in the street. I was short and slow, and there wasn't a lot of demand for that. But so my deal was, starting when I was 11, I would learn a song during the week, and a simple song with chords. And then Sunday night, there was always time. They called it song service, anybody that wanted to do a song. And my deal was that I would get up and do a song. And that became that thing of me, I can do this good. I can do this good. I can't do this and I can't do that. But when I sing, something happens inside of me. So I started learning how to play. And I remember Mama, when I was little, again, a great singer, she said, son, when you sing, reach way down deep because that's where the anointing is. And I started experimenting with that when I was 11, 12, 13. Just being in front and singing. And there was a connection, and I felt it between he and I when I would do that. And everything went away except that song and he and me and learning how to sing in front of people. But I was, you can't talk outside the family. I'm going to kind of jump around. You can't talk outside the family at all. So there's a thing called emotional incest. It's not physical, but it's emotional. And it's where a parent takes a child as a spouse. And for some reason, my mother chose me. I had 3 older brothers, but for some reason, she chose me. And she would come into my bedroom like at 10:30 at night, and I would have to sit up on the side of the bed. And she would tell me how scared she was, because with him drinking, we can't make the payments for the house. And she would dump all this on me, and she would feel better. I was terrified. And she would go back to the room and go to bed, and I would sit up all night just shaking. It was like, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God. And there's nothing you can do when you're 12. But that continued for years. But I guess it was I was 13, jumping up to that age where Dad was doing good. Everything was good in the home. And I sang with my brothers a lot when we were little, sang quartet music. But I had 2 older brothers go to Vietnam, so I would learn guitar and I would sing songs by myself. And Dad relapse is really, really big. And I mean, and the whole town knew about it. I mean, he would stagger down the street to get a gallon of vodka and carry it back home staggering. People knew him in this town. And so all dignity went out the window.
So everybody knows, but you still can't talk about it.
No. And we had to cover for him. So they were going to vote Daddy out of the church. And Mom wanted me to go down there because I was a guy, But she wanted me to go down there to hear, well, Brother Quall said this. I could go back and tell her. And Mr. Smith said this about Daddy, because it was all, controlling it. And so I cried all through the thing. I cried all through it.
You had to sit and listen to what they were saying about your dad?
Everything.
Wow.
I had to sit there. And I just sat with my head down, crying and crying and crying. And so then I go back home. Well, who said what? Who said what? And, it was damage control. And I said, well, they said this. And I was crying through the whole thing telling her. But she wasn't interested in me crying. She wanted to know. She didn't care or understand or what was going on inside of me. Mm-hmm. It was like she needed this information so she could control the situation. So they, again, voted Daddy out of the church. And you can't have a drunk pastor. I mean, you can't have a guy that's... But my deal was I would learn a song during the week. I would go back to the church when everything was going good. And then, there's maybe a song service. There may be like 4 people. It's a tiny little church. And but when they voted Dad out, And we're talking about half of these people, 10 of them were relatives. They were relatives. And so Sunday night, they voted Dad out during the week. And so I go down there with my little cardboard box guitar, and I come in the front door of this tiny little church. And my uncle, who took over interim, whatever that was, he was going to like pastor till whatever. And I walk in, and he grabbed me by the arm when I walked in the front door. And he said, "Russ, what are you doing here?" And I said, "Well, Uncle Kenneth, I came to sing my song at Sunday night." And he said, "No, you're not." And I said, "I didn't do anything wrong." He said, "I don't care. He's your dad, and we don't want you here either." And so I turn around and carrying with my head down crying, and I get back to the house, and there's chaos. And the one thing I could do to bring me peace that would just satisfy something in me. So all of that's taken away now, and I can't go to that church anymore, and I just can't sing anywhere. But somebody had told me that Jesus could be your friend. I don't know where those people even got that, because they preached, we were terrified of God and never measured up. You never measure. I'm going to stop because I'm thinking about this right now, and I don't want to forget this. But guilt is something that you did wrong. Shame tells you you are the thing that's wrong. And that was instilled in me at a very, very early age. First of all, with transferred shame, because of Daddy, that shame was transferred to me too. And I had to carry that. So Mom had a key to the church. I waited till everybody had gone home, and I knew the church would be empty, but somebody told me that Jesus could be your friend. And I had no one to talk to. Mom would come and dump all her fear on me and her anger and her rage, and then she would go back to the bedroom, and I would just sit there, what do I do? What do I do? What do I do? And I'd be trembling. It's like, I'm terrified. And so Mama had a key, and I took a key, and I went down to the church, and I would have to wait till like 10:30 at night because everybody would be gone then, because I wasn't allowed to be in there. And it was a neighborhood, so you can't turn a light on. They'd call the cops if lights came on in the church. So I would open the door, and I would feel my way to the front. And when you're 12, 13 years old, a dark church is scary. And so, but there was a little lamp on a desk in that tiny sanctuary, and I would feel my way down to the front, and I would turn that little lamp on so there'd be some light in there. I would kneel at the altar and just start talking to Jesus and tell him how scared I was. Tell him I don't know what to do, and I have no one to talk to. But that started a pattern that went on for a long, long time. Just emotional incest, going down to that church and talking to Jesus. We were 15, and Dad sobered up for a little bit, but then he pulled a big one, and the town was just through with him. The family was just through with him, and he wouldn't sober up this time. He did not sober up. So at 15 years old, I started making decisions for the family because Mom had just fallen apart, and I had my two brothers. Well, my brothers, as soon as they were old enough, they got out of there.
They're gone.
Both of them, when they were 19, my two older brothers, they were drafted and went to Vietnam. So Mom didn't know what to do. And we're in this town, and we're ostracized, and her sisters won't talk to her, that she grew up with, singing with. And she's alone. She's just alone with a husband that's laying drunk, and he would cuss her and yell at her and cuss us. And I mean, when he would drink, he was violent. I'm not in the sense, well, he was violent at times, physically, but verbally, he would cuss me and cuss my brothers, and to make some kind of, he was preaching the gospel, preaching against that. And then we're in our home, and he's drunk, and he's cussing me, and there's no sense, you can't make sense of any of this.
And the power of words, you don't even know it as a kid, but you ingest that just like poison.
Mm-hmm. Dad was a narcissist also. Everything was about him. Everything was about him. And it was like me and my brothers, we never had birthday parties because Mom and Dad, we just don't have time. They were working constantly. And I would go to my cousins, and, for Christmas, he would get drum sets, and and always had great presence. And I would go and I would watch all this and him being celebrated. Well, when my birthday came around, I mean, I wasn't even really recognized for it. But Dad had to be the center of attention, always, always. But the church every year would throw him a birthday party. The church would throw him a birthday party. Those 20 people would. They had a cake and presents, but he got a birthday, but none of us did. And you would watch that and just, what? But as my gift began to develop by the time I was 13, and I started getting good, as far as a 13-year-old could be, and I started learning the anointing. I started learning how to sing a song where you would invite him in. And the better I got, the more jealous my dad got. He would get jealous if I took any attention away from him. And so I would go to church, especially by the time I was 15. I sang all the time. So my gift really began to develop. And I would stand and sing, and there was something to it that was different, that was just different. But I knew that when I did good, that he would emotionally punish me. And so I knew there'd be like 2 days, 3 days that he would not talk to me until he got over it, and then he'd start talking again and that sort of thing. But so you want to get good. You want to sing for God. And that was just, from the time I can remember, I just wanted to sing for Jesus, nothing else, just sing for Jesus, because something happened inside of me when I sang for him. So, but I knew when I moved people, and I was moved, and he would be sitting on the front pew or up, on the stage, and when I finished, he wouldn't look at me. He just would not look at me, and I would go sit down. I knew something happened inside of me, but also in that little church, they were afraid that you would get the big head. So nobody told you you were doing good. Nobody. And so you would sing and you felt something, but Mom, none of them would say, that was good. They just avoided it altogether. And so you never really knew. You had to judge everything by what was happening inside of you, because no one encouraged you. Nobody said, man, what a great song. Nothing like that.
It was a miracle that Russ continued to sing, but he did, because when he sang, something happened inside him. The Holy Spirit, the presence of God, there was something that brought him peace, even though his life was chaos. It wouldn't be long before people outside his family and his church heard him sing, and their response would be totally different.
It's a miracle that you continued to do it. But thankfully, you had that experience when you sang that kept you wanting to do it.
It started when I was younger. It really started when I was younger. And he would visit me through music. He would really visit me through music. And so the town was done. The church was done. Everybody was done with us. And nobody would talk to us. And nobody saw, here's a 12-year-old boy and a 10-year-old boy that is in the middle of all this, and they're not getting help from anybody. They're just being shunned like everybody else. So I make the decision to move to Arkansas.
You're how old?
15. Mom just collapsed. Daddy couldn't work, and the only job she could get was frying hamburgers at a little bitty, hamburger place in town. And she would come home smelling like grease. And that was the only work she could get. And we were just barely hanging on, with him in the back, drunk, screaming. Not screaming, but singing. And you get so resentful.
I bet.
Your world is falling apart, and he's out buying vodka and coming home and laying in the back. And when he drank, he would drink for a month straight, not eat. Just drink, pass out, drink, pass out, drink, pass out. And we never saw him. He would just drink, pass out, drink, pass out. Dad would hold revivals when he was in there and doing good. Our vacation, starting by the time I was 2 years old, we would drive to Arkansas, Missouri, and he would preach in these tiny little Pentecostal churches. Preaching was his golf, his fishing. He loved to preach. In fact, one time Mom asked him, she said, Joe, on one of our vacations, why don't we go to the beach? And his response was, well, what will we do there?
Where could I preach?
Yeah, exactly, because he loved to preach. And so there was this little church that he would hold revivals in, And it was Mom's cousin, and he had heard what was going on, and he loved Dad. He really loved Dad, and Dad would preach in his church, and so he said, well, we'll help. We'll help. So I found a guy that would drive us back that had relatives in Hot Springs. And so we loaded Daddy drunk in the station wagon and loaded him in the back and just took off driving 3 days to get to Arkansas with him drunk the whole time. So we get there, and he sobers up some. He didn't want these people to see him that way, and he straightens up because he didn't want Uncle Ed and those folks there to see what he was and what he had been doing. So he got clean. He got clean. And I went to my last year of high school there. There in this small school, our graduating class, I think it was like 32. It was probably like the town you grew up in, that tiny
Very
little
similar.
town you grew up in. So I was 17, I guess, 16, 17. And I always have a heart for evangelism, always. Even at a young age, I just had a heart for evangelism, especially when music started becoming more of a calling. And me and 3 buddies. Now, Dad was good. I was 17. He was sober. He lasted 2.5 years there. And but we would meet 3 days before school, an hour before school, and just pray for our school, that God would work in our school. And it's like any other school. Everybody's interested in everybody else. But we would meet an hour 3 times a week and just pray out by our cars that God would work in our school, that people would get to know him. And then we put a little band together, and there was no contemporary Christian music. There wasn't any.
What year was this?
This was 1970.
Oh, wow.
We hadn't heard anybody, and there's no, CNN that what's happening here, what's happening there. And so we put a little band together. One of the boys of the 3 of us played drums, and the other one played bass, and I played guitar. And we put a band together, and we started taking Beatles songs and rewriting them. There was no contemporary Christian music anywhere. And so we started rewriting Grand Funk Railroad songs and Steppenwolf. I mean, taking the melodies and stuff like that, but writing Christian lyrics.
Do you remember any of the songs?
Oh, one of them was, I want to hold God's hand, I want to hold, the Beatles. And it was awful.
But it was probably cool at the time, right?
Well,
You thought it was great.
I mean, they loved the band, they loved all that and the songs. But that's what got me writing. And then eventually, Tori and I began to write together before we were married. But I asked Dad, as a small Pentecostal church, but I asked Dad if we could have a Monday night service that none of the deacons and elders would come to, because we were learning these songs, and we had a drummer and a piano player, a keyboard player, and me on guitar. Then we got another guy on guitar, and we started getting pretty good, pretty good. But it all started for evangelism. We're not going to go play here, we're going to play that. That came later as we started getting good. But I asked my dad for a Monday night service, and we'd never played anywhere. We were just rehearsing. And when nobody was at the church, we would practice at the church, and my buddy's garage. And I was after the principal almost 3 months to let us play in an assembly. And I had a Monday night service lined up that none of the deacons and elders would come to. So after about 3 months of me just bugging the principal, he finally, I guess just to get me off his back, he said, okay. And so before the assembly, we had our little, band set up here, and they did the assembly and this and that and other things. And he said, Russ and his friends are going to play a song. And so we did one of our contemporary songs that we stole a song from and rewrote Christian lyrics to it. And I invited the student body out to this country church on Monday night. Well, first Monday night, it was full. It was just full. I only knew like 3 scriptures. For God so loved the world, he gave his only begotten son. That passage right there. And I understood that. I didn't understand a lot of scriptures at all. And so after the band played, I would just standing in front of people, I would say, if you would like to accept Jesus in your heart, come forward. And the altars were full. I mean, I stood there in amazement. The altars just came and filled up the whole front part and back of the altar. and led them in the sinner's prayer. And the next Monday night, there was more people, and they just kept coming, and a revival broke out. We didn't know it was happening all over the country. We just thought God had showed up in Hot Springs, Arkansas, and we were in a revival, and we would play in the park, and people would come, and we'd give an altar call in the park, and people come. I mean, it was, I would be dressing for gym, and people would come up to me, guys, how do I find Jesus? They're coming up asking me.
What a time in life. Wow.
And passing me notes in study hall. Can I talk to you after study hall? I mean, I was not out. I was standing on stage singing, but I wasn't out there soliciting. They were coming to me.
Wow.
The only soliciting I did was with the band on stage, but it just kept growing and growing to where that little church, we opened the windows, put speakers out there, 10 deep, and they were coming. We were coming. And a couple of the guys had vans, and Hot Springs, Arkansas is a national park. So a lot of tourists. And a couple of the guys with vans, they would go downtown. Hey, you want to hear a band? And load people up and take them to this little church and they'd give their heart to the Lord. But I mean, a revival broke out, and but they were coming to you wanting to know how to become a Christian. So that was just, I can't explain it. It was just a great move of the Holy Spirit. And
opened your eyes to what is possible, or maybe even what you could be a part of, or what you were called to do, maybe?
Yeah, it was a calling. We would go downtown, and before the band, I would go down with those chick tracts and, for spiritual, whatever it is. Remember those chick tracts? You guys are old enough to remember those. And I would carry around those and witness to people on the streets before this revival broke out. I really wanted to serve Jesus. I really, really wanted to serve Jesus. And so anyway, the band just kept getting bigger, and we started getting invited to play in other cities in Arkansas. And so we got a van, and a revival was happening everywhere we went. People were getting saved. We'd play coffee houses. People were getting saved. And we were thinking, man, this is easy. This is easy.
This must be how it works.
Winning people to the Lord is so easy. And things were going good. Dad was sober. Dad was preaching. And
was he okay with your success in terms of being the revival and that stuff?
I never really asked him.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
He was happy people were coming to the church, but Mom and Dad never really liked my music. Even with the Imperials, they didn't like my music and solo career.
It wasn't their style?
No, that wasn't their style at all, and they didn't get it. Didn't get it at all. But they saw people getting saved, and that meant something to them, that people were coming to the Lord. It just kept growing. But we were all 18 and couldn't get along. Everybody thought they knew what they were supposed to do, and we'd argue and fight, and we should do this and we should do that, to the point this band, the keyboard player, he was as bullheaded as I was, but I was calling the songs. And because I was the lead singer out front, I could just threaten, well, I'm leaving, and they'd do what I want them to do. I mean, I'm 17,
Right. Right.
But we cared about each other, and we all loved to play. We just all loved to play. But there were one coffee house we played at in Jonesboro, Arkansas, and I'd called a song, and the keyboard player did not want to do it. So under his Rhodes piano, I'm getting ready to go into this song, and he flips me the bird underneath the piano. And we were there ministering for Jesus, and he just flipped me off under his piano. So
did you do your song or his song?
Exactly. Because I was the one that talked. I was the one that preached. I was the one that the lead singer. And we couldn't get along. I mean, everybody thought we should be doing this. We should be doing this. But I didn't know Scripture hardly at all. At Pentecostal churches, it's all emotion. Everything's emotion, and you don't know what Paul said. And John and Peter, and it's just all you go to church, and if you shout, it's a good service. And my mother was a shouter, and my grandmother, my gosh, she was a singer. But back then, women didn't preach, so she would sit on the second pew, and she was my solace till I was 12. She knew what was going on, and she was the only person, grandmother, my mom's mom, and they lived right behind us across the big yards, and I would go over and talk to her when I was very young, and she was an old Pentecostal woman, and she had silver hair that went down to her bottom. And I would sit on the front porch, and I'd be a rocker beside her, and she had a rocker, and she would tilt her head forward and comb her hair, just comb her hair. But she was the only one in my life that said, son, it's going to be okay. Going to be okay. Just hang in there. Trust Jesus. Hang in there and trust Jesus. But that was the only person. And then she would roll her hair up on a bun and put it up on top of her head. And then halfway through the service, she'd shout it down. But she would walk the aisles and preach. I mean, just very simple. All of them were very, very simple, not educated at all. So, and she died when I was 12, and then getting thrown out of the church, and it was like a double whammy, and there was nobody then to speak into my life. Well, back to Arkansas. There were 32 drug addicts that got saved to start that revival. At the starting point of that revival, they were the druggers in the park. They came to the Lord, all 32 of them, and they started coming. And one of the guys, and the band had been going on for a few years, and I left the band, I thought, in pretty good hands, and I wanted to take a year and go study the Bible. And I left, and I was gone. I went to the Christ for the Nations in Dallas, and I made it one semester, and the band continued to play, and my dad relapses big time. I mean, so I finished one semester, and Mom called, and she said, we're going to have to go back to California. Would you come and help? Well, again, nobody talks to them. Nobody helps them. They're just on their own. And so I leave Dallas, and I go back took a Greyhound back to Hot Springs, and I'm kind of helping them pack up. But that last year of high school, my body just started turning against me. And it continued to where when stress was so great because of the home life and stuff like that, my hands would swell to where I couldn't hold a pencil. They were so fat I couldn't hold a pencil. And sores broke out on my body that wouldn't heal. And there were sores all across the lower part of my back, and they would not heal. But I came back from Dallas. But my senior high teacher, she saw what was going on. And she would come out to the Jesus movement, and she would be in the services. And I asked her, to talk some. She knew a few scriptures too. So, every other Monday night or every fourth, fifth Monday night, she would teach the Bible to all these people. And she saw what was going on. And I thought, I'm going to have to stay in this and go back to California with this sickness and addiction and everything else. And she and her husband had taken in foster children. She was pretty much a foster child too. So when she was married and their life started building and stuff, she would help and bring kids into their home. And she came to me and she said, Russ, would you want to live with us? And I was 17, I guess 17, 18, something like that. And I knew there's no way. My mother, because I was the thing that held everything.
You were the adult.
Yeah, Dad would fall apart, Mom would fall apart, and somebody had to stand there and take care of things, and I was that guy. And my younger brother, he was just lost, bless his heart. He was just, didn't know what was. So she goes to my mother and asks Mom. She said, would you let Russell stay with us for a while and not go to California? And I knew she'd say no. I knew she'd say no. I think Mom saw what was going on with my body and everything else, and she said yes.
Wow.
So they load up the truck, and my dad, who never encouraged me, never told me I was doing good, and daily in that house, by the time I was tiny till I grew up, is you're not worth a bullet shoot you with, not worth the salt goes in your bread. You will never amount to anything. Daily. And I'm sure that's what their parents did to them, So Mom said yes. So I helped Daddy, load the truck, tie everything down. It was a grapes of wrath kind of looking thing. This truck piled up. And so the last thing Dad said to me, he did not want me to stay because I would go find him when he was drunk and bring him back to the house. And I was always covering for him. And he could do whatever he wanted. And I'd go get him, bring him home, make sure he's in bed, whatever. And he did not. He got mad. He got so mad at me that I wasn't going to go back to California with him and take care of him. And the last thing he said to me when he drove off is, "You'll never make it. You'll never make it." And he leaves.
If you've ever had to set a boundary in a dysfunctional relationship, I'm sure you can imagine just how hard it was for 18-year-old Russ to stand there, to stay in Arkansas, not hop in that car for California. But thank God he did. His father was wrong. Russ was going to make it. First, in terms of success, he was going to make it far beyond anything Russ or his father or anyone else could imagine. Within a few short years, he would rise to the top of the gospel music industry. He would be standing on the stage at the Grammy Awards, the pinnacle of music success. But all of the abuse, the trauma, the brokenness of Russ's early life, it was going to follow him there. And the voice that said, "You'll never make it, you'll never amount to anything," that voice would be louder than any award or accolade.
I want to be numb. I want those voices silent, those accusing voices. And shame, you can't believe shame. You had it before, but now you're doing what your dad did. I hated myself because I became him. And that was the worst thing that could happen to me, is that I hated him and what he did to the family. And now I'm doing it.
That's coming up in next week's episode of The Unfolding, Part 2 of Russ Taff's story. Hey, whether you're being introduced to Russ for the first time or you've been a fan since the Imperials days, you will love hearing Russ's brand new project. It's called Cover Story. It's an album 70 years in the making, covering songs by Bob Dylan, U2, Duran Duran, Paul Simon, among others. You can learn more about Russ's music at russtaff.com. Huge thanks to Russ for inviting me into his home and for sharing his powerful story. Thanks also to Chris Hauser for helping make this interview possible and for making the trip to Bell Buckle with me. Thanks to the Unfolding team, Michael Shermack, Lindsay Caparoon, our producer and network director, Jason Rackow. The Unfolding is a production of Faith Podcasts. You can find more great podcasts at myfaithpodcasts.com. We'll be back next week with another page of The Unfolding.